speak today on behalf of the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America. PhRMA is a nonprofit association.
Please introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I jumped the gun. I got too excited. My name is Jay Taylor. I'm with PhRMA. It's a pleasure to be here today. Look forward to the discussion. PhRMA is a nonprofit association that represents America's leading global pharmaceutical research and biotechnology companies, devoted to inventing medicines that allow patients to live longer, healthier, and more productive lives. PhRMA and our member companies strongly support the important work of the Special 301 Subcommittee of the Trade Policy Staff Committee and its chair, the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, as they identify countries that deny adequate and effective protection for intellectual property rights and fair and equitable market access to U.S. companies and individuals who rely on IP protection. Encouraging and fostering innovation and protecting IP of the U.S.-based innovative industries are critical to the future of the U.S. economy. IP is central to the productivity, growth, and the competitiveness of U.S. companies in the global marketplace. IP-intensive industries contribute to greater and more sustainable long-term economic growth, accounting for nearly 35% of U.S. GDP in 2010, or over $5.1 trillion in economic output. Robust IP protections have helped spark innovation and growth in countries both developed and developing throughout the world. As much as 40% of U.S. growth in the 20th century was a result of innovations, according to Nobel laureate Robert Solow. PhRMA member companies act as key economic drivers by generating high-quality, high-paying, and high productivity jobs in the United States. In 2011, the industry supported 3.4 million jobs, including over 810,000 Americans who were directly employed by the industry. And the industry exported over $50 billion in pharmaceuticals in 2012, making it the third largest U.S. exporter among R&D intensive industries. Protecting the industry's intellectual capital is important for the continued medical breakthroughs that are saving the lives of patients all around the world. Patents and other IP protections are critical in securing the investment required to develop innovative medicines, which in turn will be the next generation of generic medicines. It seems obvious to say, but we would not have copies of medicines without those original discoveries. And we would not have those original discoveries but for the IP incentives necessary for high-risk and resource-intensive investment into research and development. Our industry provides substantial contributions to patient health, with nearly $50 billion invested in research and development in 2012, and having produced more than half the world's new molecules in the last decade. Our members are world leaders in medical research, with more medicines in development in the United States than in the rest of the world combined. The United States accounts for approximately 3,400 products in development in 2013, in large part due to IP protections and other strong incentives that foster the environment needed to continue to support continued research and development. Medical research leads to advances in life-saving treatments for major diseases affecting patients all around the world. The improved use of prescription medicines can result in better health outcomes and result in lower costs for other healthcare services, such as the 833,000 annual hospitalizations avoided through the use of recommended antihypertensive medication, as well as increased worker productivity due to fewer medical complications, hospitalizations, and emergency room visits. More acutely, HIV/AIDS is perhaps the best example of the incredible progress that has been made in combating infectious disease in recent decades. The discovery and development of new treatments have turned HIV infection from a death sentence into a chronic disease. In the U.S. alone, death rates have fallen more than 80% since 1995 as a result of the development and introduction of multiple drugs used in innovative combinations. As of December 2013, there are 394 medicines in development for infectious diseases that plague many developing countries for which new treatments are needed, including a medicine for the most common and difficult to treat form of hepatitis C, an anti-malarial drug that has shown activity against a form of malaria that is resistant to current treatments, and a novel treatment that works by blocking the ability of the smallpox virus to spread to other cells, thus preventing it from causing the disease. Our companies are also hard at work at developing innovative treatments for chronic diseases, such as 73 medicines in the pipeline for Alzheimer's. In addition, since 1980, life expectancy for cancer patients has increased by about 3 years, and 83% of those gains are attributable to new treatments. These figures highlight the pressing need to defend the sector's IP rights against infringement and appropriation. The path from basic research to new medicines is extremely complex, requires high-cost risk-taking, and is fraught with setbacks. Unfortunately, many of our trading partners do not respect the value of innovative medicines as demonstrated through limitations on the availability of pharmaceutical patents in places like India with Section 3D of its Patent Act, or even Canada with its patent utility doctrine. Other barriers include unfair or impermissible compulsory licensing rules, lack of adequate regulatory data protection, lack of effective patent enforcement mechanisms, and patent or marketing approval delays that erode the effective patent term for pharmaceutical products. In addition to the IP system, other foreign government policies and practices such as price controls and cost containment measures impede market access for cutting-edge drugs. Foreign cost containment measures create market access barriers that pose a significant threat to the U.S. economy because of our preeminence in the life sciences sector. Global impacts on the U.S. industry's ability to sustain and create exports, maintain and develop jobs, and stimulate future innovation can be felt here at home. Some governments have proposed or implemented cost containment measures, such as ad hoc government price cuts, international and therapeutic reference pricing, and mandatory rebates, without predictable, transparent, and consultative processes. These policies typically put short-term government objectives ahead of long-term approaches that would ensure continued research and development into medicines that patients need most. Other countries promote preferential trade policies, including local manufacturing requirements, forced technology transfer, and de facto bans on imports, which are intended to grow domestic industries by undermining opportunities for foreign or local innovation. In the midst of a robust trade agenda, it has never been more important for the United States to signal this message to current and future trading partners. Our industry also continues to speak out against the scourge of counterfeit medicines, which affect the health and safety of patients worldwide. According to the World Health Organization and Institute of Medicine, counterfeiting is greatest in areas where regulatory and enforcement systems are less developed. For example, estimates indicate that between 10 to 30% of medicines sold in developing markets are believed to be counterfeit. Testing in 2012 found that 1/3 of anti-malarial medicines in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia lacked any active ingredient. This is why U.S. government engagement on strengthening regulatory and enforcement systems, in addition to enhanced customs controls and information sharing around the globe, is so critical. It is important that the incentives of the IP system promoting research investment be maintained, because there can be no access to medicines unless medicines are discovered in the first instance. Pharma member companies have been and continue to be partners with key stakeholders, including governments, in solving global health problems. Our companies are some of the largest contributors of funding for development of innovative cures for diseases affecting developing regions in Latin America, Asia, and Africa. In the last decade, biopharmaceutical companies provided over $9.2 billion in direct assistance to healthcare for the developing world, including donations of medicines, vaccines, diagnostics, and equipment. Without these efforts, which are threatened when IP protections are eroded and the incentives for innovating new medicines are undermined, access to effective, sustainable health care for the developing world's patients would be impossible. As stated by Bill Gates at the 2010 World Economic Forum, the key reason that we're making progress against these diseases is that there's been an incentive for drug companies to invent, and they've invented great drugs. These efforts are threatened when IP protections are eroded. We stand ready to support USTR, this subcommittee, and the entire U.S. government in seeking adequate and effective protection of IP rights abroad to ensure that patients around the world have access to the state-of-the-art medicines our member companies develop and manufacture. Thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you for your testimony. So we have about a minute left, so I'm gonna not monopolize the conversation this time. I'm going to turn directly to my colleagues and how many of these questions we can get through.
I'm sorry. Thank you for your testimony. Is it possible for you to estimate the overall cost to U.S. pharmaceutical industry due to India's policies and also their impact on U.S. jobs?
We found it very difficult to date to come up with an exact figure. And part of the reason, I'm sure, has been touched on earlier today, but I'll reiterate nonetheless. India represents a threat both in terms of the policies taking place in the Indian market standalone, but also in terms of the spillover effect into other markets where our industry does business around the globe. In other words, whether there's any sort of contagion effect of India's anti-IP mercantilist policies into other markets, where both my industry and other innovative U.S. industries are engaged. It's very difficult in the IP space to attribute exact figures and losses to these sorts of policies. We can certainly provide you with whatever information we have in writing. I'm happy to do so.
Thank you. Any additional questions?
Thank you. From reading your submission, also from listening to you now, you seem to argue that price controls as well as government purchasing and reimbursement policies may constitute discriminatory non-tariff barriers that would fall within the scope of this special 301 process. So is your argument that all of these types of policies fall under the scope of this process and are considered to be discriminatory non-tariff barriers, in your opinion?
In my opinion, the way the Special 301 statute is written, as it relates to IP-intensive industries like the pharmaceutical industry, and not just the pharmaceutical industry, but other industries in the United States that rely on IP protections, I believe it requires USTR to identify countries that, quote, deny fair and equitable market access to United States persons that rely on intellectual property protection. So if you take that for what it is, market access, these are market access issues. These are our companies which are highly regulated, and the pricing and reimbursement systems that are in place in a lot of the markets where we do business are the key to market access into those markets. Our companies really cannot enter a number of these global markets where we try to engage unless you can get through these pricing and reimbursement systems. They tend to be one of our sole purchasers in the markets, the government, basically. So if there aren't transparent rules, if there isn't due process in those systems, we run into a major market access barrier, which we think is captured in the Special 301 statute. Because really, at the end of the day, it also eviscerates the IP rights inherent in the products as well.
Thank you for that. We're at the 10-minute mark, so I think that concludes